while I think every Arsenal fan can agree they have been on and off this season, it is clear that Arsenal's principles and system has changed. And against Nottingham Forest, Arsenal saw a bigger look at what the team is supposed to look like and how it will continue to look in the future of this season. And within that, I think there's a player that is incredibly underrated, being Jurrien Timber, someone that does his job very well but very quietly, but helps Arsenal in more ways than one, and we're going to talk about it. Now against Nottingham Forest, it was another great example of Jurrien Timber being brilliant. He was one of the best players on the day, and I think more importantly going forward, Arsenal really found a new level with him in there. Now in this game, Arsenal had a lot of possession at nearly all of the time, and looking at the average positions of the two teams, Nottingham Forest were a lot deeper, as you can see. Now looking at Jurrien Timber's, Timber was in a very elevated position, in definitely a more attacking role, which was helped because he played close to Martin Odegaard and they worked really well off each other. And Timber isn't the only one. When paired with Calafiori on the other wing, Arsenal have looked so much better. With this only being the fourth game that both of them have started, Arsenal have been very good in all them games, and more importantly looked good creativity going forward even without Odegaard in the side. Now with Odegaard, it creates them triangles that make Arsenal formidable. What we saw against Nottingham Forest was Odegaard was coming deeper on the wide stretch of the pitch to break away from the press of Forest. This a lot of the time didn't give a lot of space for Timber, who usually was the one passing from deep, or it was Gabriel, but it did make it a lot easier for him to be the main person that built up from the back rather than inverting and taking that space. Now this was used brilliantly because when Odegaard received the ball, Timber would make his underlapping runs through the midfield. This is where the space is occupied because the midfielder and the winger would usually go towards Odegaard at this point, and it's that second phase of approach which has really benefited Arsenal in the last few games. Now we've given a lot of praise to Calafiori, who has also done this brilliantly on the other side, but against Nottingham Forest, Arsenal predominantly attacked down the right. Calafiori had much higher defensive numbers than you have seen him have in the past, and looking at Timber's defensive numbers, he barely had any, so he was definitely one of the main creators going forward. And a lot of the time, Timber has a very unselfish role considering he's still recovering from his ACL injury. He has to make their runs for Saka and Odegaard to get space in or around him, but more importantly is to drag players away rather than actually receiving the ball in the box or outside it. Now he did this quite a few times in the game against Forest in cahoots with Jesus, who came over as well, and it saw Timber get into good areas within the box where he was in space they hadn't even picked up from, and be able to overlap and cut the ball back to Saka, but also get into the box into them key areas. And having an extra man there with him and Jesus coming over actually gave Arsenal a lot more technical ability with all their interchanges and their constant overlaps and underlaps that made Arsenal very different. Now Timber is also so good technically that he doesn't need to stay on this right side. There was parts where he went down the left hand side as well, which we saw Odegaard, Jesus, even Saka do sometimes for his goal, which did benefit a lot. They get that extra man down there, which has not been tracked by the man markers because of how far he has moved from his original position, and it kind of elevates the fact that Arsenal are moving into a more fluid response to their team and not a necessarily rigid positional play. People can move freely, and I do think Odegaard is the main reason of that because he covers ground so well, but Timber does brilliantly considering I think he is still recovering from his ACL injury and he can cover so much ground per game. Another reason which we have seen by Timber this season that makes him so effective is that recovery time. It's another big reason why Calafiori is so effective. Not only them going forward creates that little bit of space for the wingers in front of them and their midfielders going inside, it also allows Arsenal to press and push these players up the pitch and allow them to run back and get the ball. Now this isn't always going to happen. We saw the situation where things may not go well sometimes, where Trossard does a loose pass and Saliba ends up pulling the guy down for a red card, but in most ground opportunities when there's not many people in front of them, Timber has shown his ability to run back and be able to keep the ball, same with Calafiori. And the differences between Timber and Calafiori is the fact of a little bit more experience. Timber is much more willing to make fouls that are needed and not unneeded fouls, and Timber most of the time just gets his head down and works on what he is good at, and I think that is something that really benefits Arsenal. Also in this Forest game we've spoke about how good he was going forward and that he didn't really have to do much defensive work because of how Arsenal played with him and Odegaard. And that also was helped by the fact Nottingham Forest were in a low block and Arsenal obviously were allowed to have the ball a lot, in which Nottingham Forest were kind of scared to push out with because Arsenal were countering with a lot of pace, with Timber also showing a lot of willingness to counter-attack in past games as well as this one. However, his recovery time is also good in defensive transitions, which has seen some teams struggle. Looking at Manchester City, who have now lost 5 games in a row, the main problem with them is athleticism around the team. They play a system that does do risky passes sometimes to get into high positions, and when they are pressed in midfield and they do lose the ball, it is so easy to play through them or get them on the break because they do not have that pace. I mean, we saw it with Werner against Walker. He completely skinned him and he just cannot recover in time, and we saw it for a lot of that game. And this is something Arsenal have in abundance. We have Saliba, who is one of the main people that Arsenal use as their anchor to sit back and be the guy that recycles play. But we've also got Timber and Calafiori who can do that on the flanks. Now, Timber against PSG in that first half that he played in was exceptional at this. There was a chance where Barcola for PSG runs down to the wing and he ends up catching up and doing that tackle when it matters. And these are completely different game states. The game against Nottingham Forest was where he needed to use his attacking ability and his on-the-ball qualities to make smart runs into space but also hold the ball under pressure. And the PSG game, it was much more he had to defend one-on-one with a pure winger who's trying to dribble past him. Now, there's been games as well before where people have criticised Timber, but overall he can do this in every game he wants, and I think it's still clear when he doesn't play well, he is truly recovering from that ACL injury completely, and he's not really playing in that right back role. I think that right back role is probably his best role for the team, where he can really be elevated into a player that could do multiple things for the team. And when you got Calafiori on the other side, who is also incredible at this, who deserves a lot of praise, it makes Arsenal so dynamic going forward. They both make the same runs, they both work off each other inside spaces, and more importantly, they're both solid defenders, which make Arsenal a good side. And there's been a lot of questions about why Arsenal have struggled this season, but I do think them not being able to shield their best team or the thoughts of Arteta have been a problem. Arteta has wanted to play Timber and Calafiori as their 2 fullbacks, I think, for most of it, and of course people like Odegaard not being fit and Saka not being fit in some games has even made the creativity even lower. Pretty much all the creative players have been out at some point, and when they're all out together, Arsenal really struggle like we saw in that Bournemouth game. But with the news that Ben White will be out for 3 months and Tomiyasu is nowhere to be seen, hopefully he's coming back soon, Timber will have to play a lot of minutes in the next coming weeks with the amount of games Arsenal have to play. Placement for him in there probably is Thomas Partey, who does a good job defensively, but like we saw against Newcastle, isn't going to make them runs going forward and isn't really going to force the issue when Arsenal needs it the most, which they probably will do in some of these games. This means Arsenal will have to either convert one of their left backs over to the other side or try their best to make Timber have a nice minute, and when Arsenal's game is over is to bring him off. But the best thing for him is managing his minutes at the moment. Now, overall, Arsenal need to be really careful with what they do with Timber, but ultimately Timber is one of the most underrated players, I think, for the club. And I think without him and Calafiori not being in the team, I think Odegaard would still be brilliant, but would still struggle in some aspects, such as getting that extra half space, having proper dynamicism in the wing positions, where the triangles and the squads with the striker coming over don't really work as well. Now, hopefully Timber and Calafiori can stay fit for a long time because they are so vital to Arsenal, and I do think they can be worked in 90% of game states that we will be in. Now, let me know what you guys think in the comments about Timber, and thank you guys for watching.